So here are all the parts for the subwing and the landing gear. Those are going to form airfoils that make that piece there go around and make the subwing. And then I've got end plate pieces that go on the end, and some other wooden pieces that give it some strength. And then those little black pieces, that's a wood spar that goes across. And then those black pieces and wires, one big wire is the axle, but the other little pieces there are the struts, various struts, and I'll show you how I make one in a second. But here's the directions showing you which parts we're kind of using. So it's got the end plates. Those are balsa right there. That's a balsa spar that I've made. And then there's the other plate. And then this piece will just fold over just like we did the wings. That's the axle that will go all the way through, which we'll show you. And just cut with appropriate, or from the appropriate piano wire. And then there's the strut that go into the subwing. And I was dubious of these because they just plug into a couple of holes. And I didn't know how well that would go because they're just going into the paper, but as it turned out, it worked all right. So I started by putting that little spar in with some super glue and just making sure that it is straight. And what I ended up doing was using a little right angle piece or ruler that I have just to make dang sure that it's at right angles. Because you want this to be nice and fit the paper well. Put on the other side and sort of do the same thing. You can sort of use the little cutting board because it's got right angle lines on it there for cutting fabric and things. And so you can kind of use that, at least eyeball it. There's where I put my little tiny holes where the struts are going to go. So that is the top part of that. That is a connection on the real airplane, and that'll go underneath. So I started by just adding way too much glue onto the spar and onto the balsa ends, and then just carefully put them down. I butted up the trailing edges with the end of the balsa rib, and went very well. Actually, it was a little wide. That's because I used my, if I had thinned the balsa the way it was supposed to be, they wouldn't have stuck out. But we have a quick and easy way to fix that in just a second. I'll show you. Not a big deal. Just being careful, making sure it's straight, because this will be an obvious piece if it's wrong. While that was drying, I thought I'd show you how I did these struts, because it's the same way I did struts on the cabanes and on these landing gear. So you cut out the piece of paper that you see is white, which is the shape that's going to be folded over the wire, and the wire is impregnated inside. So I take some thick super glue, and I just dab some glue right down the middle of one of the sides. It's already pre-bent, so I know it's going to fold together, but you're going to sandwich that wire in there. But I put the wire in with a little super glue first. And that's just you got to be a little careful there and make sure the ends stick out, because that's what's going to go into the fuselage and also into the subwing. Make sure that comes together, and again, it's straight, because you got to have room for the paper to go around that. Then I take a fair amount of glue to make that nice and kind of pliable and wet, and then fold it over. I'm kind of wiping the glue away. It's not as much as it seems. And you squeeze those suckers together as best you can. I'll show you later. One of these was open and I couldn't close it. But you keep doing this and they tend to close pretty well if the wire isn't too thick. But they will plug in just like this. You're showing there's a hole there, and that's the way that one plugs in. I had to trim the wire a little bit because it was a little bit long. Here's the front one. It goes into another hole, and that's kind of just give you an idea how it's going to go together. Now here's the subwing dry, but you can see those balsa pieces, or the ribs, are a little thick. So I just sanded them down later. It worked out fine. I kind of forgot to sand them to the right thickness before, otherwise I don't think I would have had to do this. But I just sand those down each side until they were flush with the black paper, and Bob's your uncle. No, any different. Just to clean them up, make them look right. And in the next figure, there it is. So you can't even tell. There's no balsa overhanging now. And they're pretty dry. There's the axle. I just pre-cut it to the right size. It's on a on the plans, I show you how big it has to be. And then I made my 2 holes already previously through those little ribs, and the wire just fits right in through there perfectly. Nice width. Then I added some super glue on either end, thick super glue, and hit it with some accelerator to glue it in place, make it so it wouldn't fall out or roll around quite as easy. Gives a little structure too. But that's the basic components. Now you treat this like the wings. You fold this up. Now, one thing I didn't do, which I should have, was pre-fold this, because my leading edge, because there's no other support, the leading edge kind of has some crinkles in it, and it shouldn't. So I made a mistake there. You'll see that later on as this thing gets finished. But I was not thinking. Roll that over just like we did on the wings. Fold it down. Make sure it's glued down nice and tight. Make sure the trailing edge is tight. Trailing edge has no structure on it either, so it tends to get wavy. So you got to sort of play with it to make sure it comes out flat and true and straight. You don't want a wavy trailing edge. It'll look dumb. Once that's done, put a little glue on the ends and put the end plates on. So I just showed putting one of the end plates on. These aren't that important because this is all going to be painted anyway. But it also means that it's paper and not balsa, so that the paint would go over the correct kind of material in all places. So it would look different if it went over just the wood. So I put those end plates on anyway, and they fit like a dream. Again, this model has fit together extremely well, really well. I'm very pleased. So there's the Subwing all done. Now, there's ways to put the landing gear on the struts that you could do in various ways. Now, these again are kind of fiddly because there's 4 struts that go in. Typically with models, these struts would be like V struts and they'd fit in one spot, but they don't. There are 4 separate struts on this, and so I was a little dubious of it. And when I'm plugging those in, as I said, they're not being glued in right now. I'm just kind of checking them. They're just going to be glued in. There's nothing underneath them. And so I probably should have put something like some balsa or even some extra paper behind there so that you'd have a better, a better sort of base to stick these into. But I didn't do that. I just wanted to see how it would go as the directions are stated in the kit. And as it is, I think it's turned out okay. The proof will be in the pudding when I put the tires and wheels on. If I can set the airplane up or if it starts to sag over time. But anyway, this is just checking to make sure these fit. They're sided, or not sided, but there's a forward and a back, and you have to check which one is which. But now notice that the one on the right side, didn't close ever. So anytime something didn't close, this happened on the cabane struts too. This is how I fixed that. All I did was take a little of my putty, any putty that you have works fine, and put a bead of putty down into that slot. This tends to happen a lot of times with struts, at least the way I do it, because sometimes I can't find piano wire that's thin enough, and so the paper barely makes it around, and you do tend to leave openings sometimes. So this is how I fix that, so that once you paint it, no one will know the difference. But you just sort of shove it in there, clean off the edges, the top and the bottom, and make sure that there's some putty in the slot so that it will dry and fill that slot. Very easy. You can take most of it just with your fingers, and then I don't show this, but I come back once it's dry and sand it with sandpaper so that it gets smooth, and so there's a transition and no gloppy pieces of putty on the paper. But that's self-explanatory. If you're doing this, you would definitely see how that works. That's not difficult to do. Again, once painted, it'll look just fine. But that way, you've got your strut filled up, and it'll be ready to go. Won't look bad. Now, what I decided to do with this one, again, because I've never made something with 4 different pieces, was I stuck them into the Subwing without gluing, and then I put my super glue on the tips of each of these wires and onto the paper where they're going to fit into the fuselage, thinking I'll plug these in, let them dry, then pull off the Subwing and paint the Subwing. So this is me trying to get this in here in these little holes. It's a little difficult. The test fitted about 8,000 times. It went really well. When I had the camera on and the glue in, it was more difficult. That's pretty much the way things go. But after some fiddling around and being careful and swearing a little bit, um, got everything into the holes. That was a genius move there. Finally get into the holes. And now I'm sitting there checking it to make sure it's square and flat and looks good. But you can see, there it is. These pictures are just kind of trying to show you overall what it looks like before it's painted. And you can see that it looks like the landing gear. It looks like tubular steel, I think. It looks fine. Looks every bit as good as a plastic model landing gear. And again, once painted and finished up, it'll look really good. Just trying to give you an idea. And there it is. In a little better lighting, but you can see the subwing on there. And then all I did was then, once these were dry, I hit them with a little of that accelerator. Then I just pulled off the, I think here, I pulled off the little subwing, and then the struts kind of stayed where they were supposed to, where they originally were. That one right there was a little bit loose. I had to play with that one a bit. You can see it came out of round, but in general it was fine. And this is the finished product, painted, and looks just fine. I like it.